So actually, one meta question is,
Yeah.
which part of my research would you be interested in me going into? The reason I'm asking is because I'm sort of doing like two levels of research right now.
Yeah.
There's like what I think of as the meta level, which is like looking at organizational structures and incentives and like all the things about sort of like the organization. And then
Right.
there's the like unmeta level, which is that like digging into the programs that the organization would run if it existed. So I'm like trying to both like build DARPA and be a PM at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of have like, and so like this research is like very focused on sort of like organizations and like incentives and sort of like history around like patents and stuff like that. And then this level is like about like, okay, like how is atomically precise manufacturing working? Like reading paper, like very much like technical research. And I'm happy to talk about either one. I'm happy to talk about both, but I want to get a sense of which is more valuable for you.
Yeah, I think I would love to talk about both.
Okay.
Not only
Cool.
how you're doing them differently or the same or how they overlap, but what the kind of the bridge is between them, right? And like
Sure.
how do you balance both of those things?
And
how do you?
I don't know.
So I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
What kind of how do you describe your research goals right now? What's the 2-sentence pitch?
Yeah. So there's I'll give you two different ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you the like the very serious like adult one, and then I'll give you the real reason.
Mm-hmm.
So the very serious adult thing is that I'm basically working on the hypothesis that there is a class of project of innovation that is sort of too researchy to be a startup. It's too but at the same time it's too sort of like it requires too much engineering and too much focus to be an academic project.
Mm-hmm.
And that the institutions that exist today sort of have a set of overlapping constraints that prevent this kind of work. And so my hypothesis is that it may be possible to create a new kind of institutional structure that enables this kind of work. So that's like the very serious adult version of the hypothesis. The real reason is I'm trying to ask the question, how do we get more awesome sci-fi shit? Because that's what I want. So those are the two, but I can't like say that to.
So how much of this is scratching your own itch?
Basically all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like the real honest truth is that it's basically me being scratching my own itch. I like to think that my itch is aligned with things that are good for the world and for humanity, and I like tell myself a lot of justifications. But if we're being really, really honest, it's like because like I want awesome stuff.
Yeah. So kind of in reading about you and about your work, I mean, it really does. I mean, you've been in the trenches building things, and you've also kind of shown, I think, that you're an incredibly competent researcher, right? Like I think the DARPA, is it an essay? I don't even know if you call it an essay, but it
piece.
Yeah, the DARPA piece I think was a good example of that. I think those are two things, right? Making things and doing research about things are really they're two different things that go kind of hand in hand.
Yeah, I would say I like to think that they're more connected than like that is very much a spectrum, right? Like
sure.
that it's not two different things, but it's absolutely a spectrum.
Yeah. So what is but when you look at the kind of the two different worlds, right? Like the two worlds that you mentioned, like between academia and between like startups. Like startups are very much about building things. Academia is pretty much about publishing papers. So those two worlds, I think, still, in my opinion, still struggle to talk to each other. or to see themselves as like a fluid continuum.
Yeah.
Um, what has been the kind of biggest surprise for you, having published that DARPA piece and kind of gotten some attention and feedback on it?
Biggest surprise. So have I been actually surprised? I think
Well,
I'm gonna like I'm actually like not that much has surprised me,
mhm,
honestly. Is it has sort of, I think, maybe instead of surprised, the way I'll answer it is that uh like the thing that I expected that was even more so, like I sort of knew but is even more so, is that excuse me, um the like the um value of putting in the like extra effort to make something that feels really substantial is really worthwhile. So what I
mm,
mean by that is that I spent, you know, at least a week and a half like just making it like making it hopefully like delightful to interact with, like actually thinking about fonts, which I'd never done in my life, and
yeah,
like futzing around with JavaScript and all of this, because so I had intended actually to um just like I had it in a Google Doc, and
right,
I had intended to do that, and a friend poked me and it's like, this might not have the effect that you think it will if it's just like a Google Doc, because like because the truth is that it is intellectual exhaust from the real work that I see myself doing. So like
right,
the goal, like this was literally like, oh, huh, it's like I've been looking at DARPA a lot. Like I
mhm,
feel like it'd be valuable for other people to like see these conclusions.
right,
So it was really like what I had intended to do was like not have it be like a piece and just like put it in a Google Doc and like send it around to some people. That was the
yeah,
intention.
yeah,
And so, but I think that people would not have reacted to it in the same way if it didn't feel so substantial. And so like the like the I think that the like people maybe denigrate the like putting a lot of effort into polish, but like if it's something that you think is substantial, like putting in that extra effort,
yeah.
I think has more payback than one expects.
Interesting. So you talk about the intellectual exhaust. I love that. I love that term for it, because it did. That's what it came across as wow. Finally, someone has done like enough serious thinking about why this works and has taken the time to put that together coherently. As you kind of started on this path that you described earlier, building more cool sci-fi shit. Um, did you jump right into DARPA right away, or did you kind of survey the landscape beforehand and then hit on DARPA, or what was the kind of path to that?
Yeah, it was sort of very winding and circuitous. So I think I was always, like, if we're being honest, I was always a little bit biased towards DARPA, but it
Mhm,
wasn't jumping straight to DARPA. So um, like I'd sort of been aware of DARPA for years, and it
mhm,
really started with um, actually just looking at, like, doing a survey and like looking at like what are the organizations that have consistently produced sort of like these paradigm shifting pieces of research, and um, and then sort of like overlaid with that question is, and which of these um, sort of like are people not actively trying to copy all the time, right?
mhm.
So I think that that sort of quickly narrowed it down to DARPA, because um, you know there's a bunch of others that I think people tell themselves that that are not, that are like very obvious, like Bell Labs, right? Like people like
Mhm.
corporate R&D, like everybody's referencing that, but like not that many people. Like DARPA is like sort of shockingly under the radar.
Mhm.
Um, and then it also is like you see lots of people saying like, oh, I'm gonna make like the next Bell Labs, or I'm gonna make the next Skunk Works, but you
Right.
don't see that many people saying like, I'm gonna make the next DARPA. And so like the fact that it is under the radar made me suspect that um, there might be some like untilled earth there.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of why I like sort of quickly narrowed down on that.
Well, one of the things that jumped out to me, it's interesting because I was on the board of NOAA's ocean exploration program, and so have kind of been in DC a lot talking about how do we advance ocean technology and ocean science. Really,
Yeah.
kind of thinking from the highest levels, right? Uh, and it's interesting because this idea comes up all the time. There's like this, I think there might even be like legislation that's pending around creating an ARPA-O for the ocean.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you say like this idea has been like under the radar, because in my world, it's been like kicked around and talked about and discussed to death. Like, how are we going to actually implement it? And there's a massive like gap between, and this is true for the Bell Labs and the Skunk Works, between knowing the blueprint, knowing what to do, and
Yeah.
actually doing it.
Yeah.
And this is what I thought was so cool about your piece. And I actually did this recently for like standards, like talking about CubeSat, because this is another thing that came up. People want to create the CubeSat for the ocean. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, what are you actually talking about when you say that?
Yeah.
And what I loved about your piece is like you broke it down. Okay, what are we actually talking about? And one of those things is you're talking about program officer independence and accountability, which is something that is really actually quite rare in the investing in science space. It's very common in the investing in technology space,
Right.
but investing in science, it's very hard to like dig in and see like what are the track records of NSF program officers.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, so this is actually something that I'm like actively grappling with, which is that what I worry is that there's actually a fundamental trade-off between two things that we want when you're talking about like program manager independence in a government organization, where one thing that we want uh, generally is like transparency and accountability for the government. Like we want to know where our taxpayer money is going, and like we want to know that's being spent responsibly. At the same time, in order to get these outsized results, I think that we see very consistently that you sort of like need to give people free reign, and like while they're accountable, they need to be accountable on a time scale that is different than like the taxpayer time scale. And so I think that that's just like a tension that I like wanted to explicitly call out.
Yeah, I think so. I also think the other thing that you talked about is risk, where like I think that's related to the kind of this second aspect of what you just mentioned, is how do you actually incentivize people not to shy away from
Yeah.
risky topics, and do you kind of there's lessons to learn from DARPA, and we can kind of talk. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you learned in that regard. But I also want to hear how you think risk, like NSF program officers, like how do you interpret that they handle risk?
Yeah. So I know I've studied NSF program officers much less than DARPA PMs. So I
Yeah,
just want to like caveat that like this
sure,
is, I'm
sure.
sort of like straying into like, I mean, you probably know about this more than me, but to my understanding, it's like, and people have actually done studies on this where for better or for worse, NSF program officers are sort of like in it for the long game, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
they can be there for an entire career, and as part of this, so one is that you need to sort of make career level risk assessments rather than 5-year level risk assessments. So that's one piece, and then another is just perhaps this is unfair, but I feel like there's a little bit of what is it where you're like too close to the people that you're supposed to be regulating, where program officers like develop these like long-term relationships with the professors that they fund, right? Like I've talked to friends who are professors, and they like, that is just like part of the thing where it's like you get to know your program officer, and it's like you kind of have this relationship.
Sure.
And so you almost like don't want to jeopardize that as a program officer. And then I guess the third thing is like, again, just to like draw the distinction between program officers and DARPA PMs, is that the program officers, their job is not so much to like take, like, it's a different kind of risk, because like they're basically just putting out open solicitations and then like judging the applications that come in. And so it's like, what is risk sort of means something different. It's like they can't really like succeed or fail.
Yeah.
In that context.
Did you ever read the Sophie Bacall book about loon shots?
Yes, I am a huge fan of that book.
Okay.
I actually did. I have I can send it to you later. I did a Twitter thread of like my like a little book report on it.
I thought it was really well done too, and I thought like he brought out some, he had some slightly different takeaways from that. But I love this kind of the idea of like the phase transitions, right? Like how do you keep groups? So what? How do you think DARPA does that? Like how do you think they manage those kind of different transitions? You can speak to a little bit.
So yeah, like,
what's the overlap between that book and the research that you've done at DARPA?
Yeah, so like so if we're talking about phase transitions within an organization, like how it sort of goes, is that like DARPA has stayed small. I think that is underappreciated, right? There are around 100 program managers, and I don't think that it's explicitly designed this way, but like that's right around Dunbar's number. It is possible, like it's actually possible for the DARPA director to know every single program manager and what they're working on. Whereas my understanding is that the NSF is like at least an order of magnitude larger than that. And so and like that, I think that really changes the dynamics. So if we're talking about phase transitions, like the NSF is on one side of a phase transition line and DARPA is arguably on another.
Okay.
And so like that's, and then like also the same thing, like DARPA super flat stuff, he talks about like stake versus rank, right? And so like that comes right in there as well, where like your program managers are not worried about being promoted. Like what, like politics isn't going to get you anything. Whereas if you're an NSF program officer and you are worried about your career, like it's probably a good idea to play a little politics.
That's interesting. Okay, I change topics a little bit, or maybe change gears a little bit. Do you are you familiar with the work of Paula Stefan? I interviewed her. I don't know if I sent you the interview that I did with her.
Not by name.
Okay.
What is something that
she's
worked on?
So she has been a pioneer in the science of science funding, like studying the science of science funding. And she wrote a book called How Economics Shape Science that I think is so good. I mean, it's like, I stopped like highlighting and underlining it because it was too dog-eared. To me, she's the kind of the foremost expert on the economics of and the incentives that scientists face.
Nice. Can I briefly interrupt to like make a meta comment on my research process, which is that when I'm having a conversation with someone, I always have a notepad here. And awesome. when someone says something that is relevant, I write it down. And at the end of every day, I go and I digitize all my notes and like look up the references and put like reading in to do. So I am interrupting just to like interject the like meta comment about research process.
No, that's great. All right, cool. Well, I'm glad to know that, and we'll dig into that into the research mode part about that. But I do the
Yeah,
same thing.
sorry,
That's really cool.
I apologize. You're talking about Paula.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of all of her work. I recommend her books and her work, all of her. She's got some new work out about how scientific funding agencies stunt the younger researchers' pursuit of novelty. How it
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
so she's got some really good stuff on this. Anyways, she has an idea that she kind of puts forward in the middle of the book around thinking of investing in science as a research portfolio, right? So applying kind of modern portfolio theory to investing in science, which is something that I don't think is really done, right? Like no one kind of thinks about what's our portfolio of investments into like scientific capital. And it's interesting because like the way that science is funded now in the United States, like largely like it is, goes back to the endless frontier, right? Vannevar Bush and his kind of idea. And it still kind of operates in, I don't know what that was. It still kind of operates in that kind of mentality, right? It's very like peer review just dominates the way that science is funded. And so like one of the like exercises I've been thinking about, and I think this would be a super fun topic to write about, and I encourage you to run with this if you like this idea, but like just like a list of scientific assets like that we actually could invest in, right? Like, or how we invest, right? So like the like peer reviewed is one idea. Like Carl Bergstrom just published a paper about how maybe lotteries might be a better idea. Like prizes are another one. Like just some place to like list out like what are the actual mechanisms for that people are actually using to fund science, not like the places where it's coming from, but the actual different mechanisms that people are using. And I think and I think the DARPA model is another one, right? Like a distributed, empowered program manager is like one of those like modes of research.
Yeah. Have you seen Andrew Lowe's any of his work on this?
I have not.
Okay, yeah,
No.
check that out. He like is also talks about like other possible mechanisms. I think his big thing is like trunched portfolios for like very large scientific projects. Specifically like drug discovery, but applicable to other places.
All right. How do you spell his last name?
L-O.
Oh, L-O.
Yeah.
Okay, easy.
He's a professor at MIT, I believe.
Great. All right. This is perfect because I've been thinking a lot about this. I think there's so much to be done. I really love the idea of this idea of applying modern portfolio theory to it, like creating like not just like an endless frontier, but actually an efficient frontier. Like what are we actually doing? Transparency is a huge part of that. So in that, with that kind of like foundation, what do you think what are like some other things that you think are underappreciated or underrated mechanisms? So, right, like DARPA, obviously you think highly of. What other mechanisms should we be experimenting with?
Well, so you definitely mentioned prizes. I think, so there's the, let's see, other underrated mechanisms. I mean, there's the Stripe Press actually just re-released Scientific Freedom. So that's the Donald Braben's venture research model, which is just kind of like straight up I'm sure you've read Pasture's Quadrant. So like so he's just like straight up like, okay, like Bohr's Quadrant, which I think of sort of like, I think of the venture research ideal as kind of like what HHMI does. And I think perhaps like more and like to expand like the idea of basically saying like I think that you're like a pretty legit researcher. I'm just going to give you like 5 years worth of funding and like
Mm-hmm.
go do some stuff, right? Like really just like pure exploratory. And I think like that does not happen in many areas. So that's
So I would agree with that. What would you say the state of that is right now? Because what I'm seeing is I see a lot of people starting to do that, right? Like I think of like you and Andy. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Never met him personally.
Matushek.
Matushek, yeah.
Yeah,
I think his work is so interesting. Not only the content, but I'm following him in terms of I think he's like pioneering this kind of whole model for independent research. So I think like the meta aspect of what he's doing is
yeah,
really good.
yeah.
So where else? So HHMI, you mentioned. Who else are you kind of following? Who you think is like kind of prototyping a possible future there?
And so I think what I want to do is like sort of just like distinguish between what Andy's up to and what HHMI. So there is
Yeah.
like I think just like independent research is underrated as like a different mechanism. So HFMI,
Okay.
I think of as still being like fairly part of academia, right? Like so
Mm-hmm.
people there are still like they're for the most part doing like academic research, and like they're probably going to go and become professors after
Yeah.
their tenure at HHMI. Um, on the independent researching front, a super underrated mechanism that so actually like let's riff off of Andy. Right now, Andy is funded by Patreon. So he's like funded like he's funded by me. Like
Me too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. So he's funded by us, and so I think there's this concept that uh, um, basically like charity funding of research, and
Yeah.
what I mean by that is like so I'm gonna digress like this will
Sure.
this will run up, but basically like if you look at like most religious traditions and most cultures, there's this there's the idea of tithing, right? So you're supposed to like, and it's like shockingly consistent that you're supposed to give like 10% of your income to the so like the needy,
Right.
and you see this in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and
Yeah.
like so like I believe in Hinduism as well. Like it's super consistent.
Yep.
Um, and, and normally when we think of charity, we think of like giving it to the people who like don't have enough.
Yeah.
And I think that, but what we don't do is what I'd love to get us to think about is like also applying that to I call it like pay it forward tithing,
Yeah.
where like giving it to people who are doing like weird crazy new things,
Right.
and like it's almost like morally validating that. So I think
Sure.
just like giving
Yeah.
is an underrated mechanism. So instead of like asking for like having the government take our money and then go give it to people, like just give it to people. um
I love that idea. I know
yeah,
we were talking about this earlier, but like this idea of, I've been working with Cindy and Denny at Experiment, and I find that like really rewarding to be building like a portfolio of
yeah,
science that I'm backing. And anyways, so I've got like a big Kickstarter portfolio. I'm excited about my Donors Choose portfolio, and now my Experiment portfolio
yeah,
too.
like that's I can't believe I forgot about Experiment.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly like what they were trying to do. And I think the I mean like I think the reason that it didn't take off is because it wasn't funding. Well, one is I think that it's like a cultural shift that needs to
Mm-hmm.
happen, right? Like I think that right now it's most people would not consider giving like funding Andy as sort of charity in the way that funding a soup kitchen would be. But I would like, and the like sort of very logical argument why they should consider it like that is that at the end of the day, like the way that humanity like moves forward is through these discoveries, and so it's a and like so you're almost like helping someone in need 100 years from now. In that, like, if we sort of like realize the dream of scientific and technological advancement, then the living standards should come up, right? Like, and you've seen that consistently.
So I agree with that. I do think it's definitely like a long-term kind of commons investment. I will also I would add something different, having been on the other side, and I've run like 3-4 Kickstarter projects, and we've raised I've like collectively like raised almost $1 million on Kickstarter. So I've raised a lot of money on Kickstarter for different projects, and crowdfunding changed my life, and it changed my perception of how to interact on the internet and how to and like this idea of social capital. And let me expand on that. So
yeah, please.
Have you run a Kickstarter campaign or any kind of crowdfunding campaign? Well, I think everybody should. And I think the reason that they should is because it's an amazing thing to put your dreams on the line and to ask for help from people.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's okay. Like the stakes are actually quite low to not get funded. But if you do succeed, it's an incredibly powerful feeling, and you do see every single person. What I think people don't realize is the person on the other side sees every single person. Yeah. They see it all because it's such a thrill for them. That I feel like this real need, one, not only to give back because I had so many people support me, but I feel the need to I know that if I support people, maybe they'll be more likely to support me. But I do think there's this very visceral thing that's starting to happen with Kickstarter and Donors Choose and GoFundMe and Patreon, that more people are understanding that kind of need for social capital. So I actually think you could say it's even more kind of selfish than that, than just like the altruistic long-term giving. Like, I think actually that kind of social capital can come back to you if you know how to ask for it appropriately. So I would say that. So I would like even add to it that there's like even more to that. But
and actually, you reminded me of one other point that so I have not practiced talking about this idea before. Okay. So this is just like it's the first time I'm actually like talking to people about it. The problem with sort of, I think both Kickstarter and Patreon is that can really only, like the level of funding that you can get from it for an individual person or project is like fairly capped, right? So it's like it'll fund 1, maybe 2 people. To really do like real research, often you need like teams of people and and equipment. And so what I would love to see is actually for organizations that have benefited from research in the past to start engaging, like they should be the ones who are like tiding forward. And so because it's like, if you look at it, it's like, it is so hard to capture value from research. Like I'm sure, like that it's like, we think like, oh, you could patent it. It's like, no, it's like, it's like way too like ephemeral of like what will be valuable. Like, it's like, who do you give the money to? It's like the people who failed trying to do the thing. Like, did they contribute knowledge? But like, if we just sort of say like, okay, like forget about people getting the value from that they create, but instead, like, if you happen to have started a company that like has really high margins because of like research that someone has done in the past, perhaps that company should just be like funding more research in the like for the future.
I think that's
yeah.
I think that's really well put, and I think that's kind of I think that's the ambition and the hope for a lot of this philanthropy that we see.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's living up to it yet, but I think that's like, it seems kind of like the hope. But I think you're right. I think there's a ton almost like of like societal responsibility that's not being fulfilled in that regard. So I appreciate that. I want to make sure we have time for research mode.
Cool.
Because I want to see how you operate.
Sure thing.
You want to share your screen and go into it?
Yes. Let me. My mouse needs to wake up. And I'm going to share my screen. So you'll see me looking. You'll see me looking off to the left because that's where my main screen is.
No problem.
So let's see. Let's see. So are you?
Yep, I'm in.
So can you see like I just want to make sure like you see the window that's moving around? Yep. Okay, cool. I just want to like you're looking at the right screen. Okay. So let's see. So let's start with like just what I was doing this morning.
Great.
Yeah. So my sort of main mode of research is actually writing. So I'm very much a sort of Zettelkasten researcher. So what I have is notes that are open. So let's see, one thing. So let's see. So I recently read this book called Secrets of Apollo. It's basically about how they develop different basically management systems for doing these large projects. And one of my hypotheses is that we've become worse at basically like planning long-term things. So so I'm digging into that. And so one of the things that this book mentioned is, and like they literally just like said, like they mentioned the importance of it over and over again, but they never actually describe it, was this thing called program evaluation review technique, otherwise known as PERT. So I'm like, okay, like what the heck is PERT? So let me see. It's tough because it pops up on another window. So then I'm like, okay, there's this PERT thing, and so I like create a new note about that. And
so I just want to note that you're using Bear here as your note-taking system, and Correct. You have kind of a Zettelkasten-like philosophy here. So that's right. Kind of okay. Cool. Good to know.
Yeah. So so then I would be like, okay, like I would just basically
like, do you actually have Bear open when you're reading the book? So like I'm just looking at the notes for the Apollo book. Like, are you just kind of reading?
Oh, yeah. So
before have this open?
No. So when I'm reading, I can actually. Do you want me to go get the book and show you like literally what I do with the book?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
That would be great.
One sec.
No problem.
Okay, so when it's a physical book, as I definitely prefer physical books, but sometimes they're not. So with a physical book, I go through and like when I see something interesting, I will fold down the page and then like underline the thing, and then like sometimes write myself a little note in the margin. Okay. So for all you people who are aghast, I apologize. I was once like you. And so then after I'm done with the book, I then go through and copy all of the thoughts from the from the book into Bear. And in the case, and I tend to do this, and sometimes what I'll actually do is like literally take pictures of the page,
like the text.
Yeah, okay. The text, or if I'm if it's like a digital text, then I'll just like screenshot it. So you can see here, these are my notes on scientific freedom, and I like literally just screenshot the things that I think are interesting. So then, and then what I also do is like, as I'm going through the book, whenever there's something that feels relevant to a note that I already have, I'll just like stick that in. So, or create a new note. So like, a really big theme in this book is that things fall apart at interfaces. So, yeah, like all the rockets that blew up are probably because like that something went wrong with the interface. Like you can almost guarantee that. Anyway, so I'll create a note about that. And then like these blue like most of the bullet points are like basically me rephrasing what I feel like the book is saying, and then like the blue is like just questions, so that I try to like differentiate the book's voice from my voice in notes about the book. So that's that.
That's cool. And then so you're creating like permanent notes here too. I noticed like you have your working notes online. So how do you decide when some of the notes that you're taking in Bear are going to go on your kind of public facing?
So
notes?
What? Yeah. So I tag all. So you'll see down here at the bottom. There's different tags. So and like the way the system works is that some tags are public and some tags are not. So it's like I have, so let's see, you can actually, let me pull over my Bear window. There's nothing like too embarrassing on here. So, but like you can see down the side. So like, so like I have private tags. So like actually like most of the tags are by default public. Things that are not public are like inbox, which is everything from just like random thoughts. Like it's just like completely unpolished. And then,
which is actually quite common. I'm realizing in these interviews is like people need a place just to write down. Like, anyways, that's
exactly. Common. Like writing down just like stupid like. You know, it's just like stupid like philosophical musings that come up. Like for example, like one of the things that's there in box right now is just like the best technologies don't always win, which like I think is actually pretty true. But then to sort of like flesh it out, it's like it's like very true on the surface, but like what does that actually mean? So it's not like I wouldn't put that online. But then so then like once a note, and then some notes are like specific to projects, but then once something's pretty good, then I tag it with evergreen, and like all of these are like sort of like the things that are very public.
Cool.
Yeah.
So once you have that tag, it automatically like the Bear does the publishing and the like.
So Bear doesn't publish it. There's like a different piece of software that then goes and publishes it.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, Bear is like just sort of like just a very nice text editor that will link notes together.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I use Bear mostly because it just has like a very pleasant UI.
So is that why? So I'm looking at the notes on your website, and like sometimes I'll come across links that aren't there. Is that because those aren't tagged as evergreen yet?
It's
You
either
haven't made
because
them public.
they're private or I haven't created that note.
Oh, you haven't created that note. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
exactly. So sometimes
Okay.
what I'll do is like when I'm writing a note, I'll um, uh, create a like potential to a note, and
Yeah.
then what that will do is if I ever then create that note, it like because it's all text based, then it will
Yeah.
like automatically uh, reference that note. So like I'll do that a lot with like people's names,
Yeah.
because like so it's something that I actually find. So this is a research thing that I think is underdone, which is like paying attention to the names of people as they're mentioned or in papers or like different things, because very often I'll like realize like, wait a minute, like that's the same person who did this other thing over here. Um, or like they'll be like mentioned offhandedly in like one book and then like just like pop up somewhere else.
Okay.
And like that's one of the things I really like about this system is that
Hmm.
it or like also with it's like in what I'm doing, I pay a lot of attention to like sort of like case studies
Yeah.
of like different like people use like technological examples. So I'll be like the transistor, right? And it's like people
Yeah.
because people like make a lot of arguments around the transistor, and so um, hey, like if I just sort of like make that a stub, um,
Mhm.
that then just lets me see all the places that it's also been mentioned and sort of like pull together arguments that have made around it.
Got it. Okay, cool. Um, and then so you've got these notes that you're collecting in your system. How do they start to take shape? Or is there something more you want to show me in terms of like reading
No,
this?
no,
Like,
no.
how do they start to take shape as essays and arguments? And where does that live for you?
Yeah. So here I'll just show you like literally what happened with the DARPA piece. Um, so what start like usually I'll just start to notice that I have like there's sort of like a lot of notes around a single idea. Um, and then what I'll do is I'll create an index page that
Hmm.
so for example, um, just so I realized like that I was taking a lot of notes around the ARPA model.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started just collecting the notes and I'll like move them around and sort of like, and this is like, at first it's just like literally just like a list.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while I start to um, sort of group them into related things. And so like this is for a really long piece. Um, and then if it's something like it also depends on like how many notes. So like for like a like just like a short little blog article, it'll
Mm-hmm.
usually be a combination of like 3 notes or something.
Mm-hmm.
In which case I won't create an index. I'll just sort of like go into the notes and follow them around.
Got it.
So I think I have publishing notes. Um, so uh, where I'll just like go and pull all the things. Um, let me see. Yeah, and so what I'll do is I'll sort of like uh, I'll copy all the text from like sort of like a core note. Like I'll almost like write the essay as an outline
Mm-hmm.
around like as an outline using different notes. So like almost like every sentence of a paragraph would be a different note title. And then
Right.
what I'll do is I'll go and like expand each of those. So I'll go
Got
and
it.
like go to take that note and expand.
Got
I
it.
feel like the like platonic form of communication wants to be like fractal like that, where it's like you can look at a thing and it's like an outline, and
Mm-hmm.
then or it's like it's a paragraph, and every sentence of that paragraph could become its own paragraph, and then within that paragraph every sentence could become its own paragraph. And I feel like that could turn, that sort of idea can turn into an essay or can turn into like a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. So you think um, that's what the internet essay wants to be, that kind of fractal?
um I think that is one. So actually, no, I don't think that it wants to be. So here's the
Okay.
thing: is actually like the argument is that that is the way that you want to construct it, but then the thing that you want to show to people, um, you need like people. You want to compose non-linearly, but things people like to read things linearly. Um,
Mm, got it.
because like if I like I'm actually doing you the reader, I'm putting all the work on you. If I were to like give you a fractal and say like here explore this, um that actually makes it harder for you to understand what's going on. So if
Mm,
I as the composer like actually really want to help you understand, it is my job to sort of like put a narrative and a linear structure on things.
yeah. I think, I agree with that. Completely agree with that, especially, kind of from a writing perspective. I've been thinking a lot about designing for curiosity, right? Like what I'm thinking about, like the tools in my life that encourage me to ask more questions and to be more curious. Like, and I think Wikipedia is like kind of like in a sense that fractal um, idea.
Yeah,
And I think your DARPA piece is another good example, right? Like it's kind of a fractal in that way. Um, and what I love about them is they don't necessarily complete the thought. The DARPA one did. I thought it was a convincing argument. But what it does do to the reader is it does make them, by putting the work on the reader, you are emboldening the kind of curiosity in them. You might not be reaching the most people. You might be weeding some people out with that. Um, but I think that this idea of designing for curiosity um, is something that's kind of underrated and underexplored.
yeah.
Anyways.
Well, that's like I think that the best example of this is video games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Video game, like that is what a video game is, where it's actually like a very finely crafted narrative, and like the game designer, if they're good, they've really like it's not, they haven't just like plunked you down. It's not and like said like go. Some games are like that. Other game like, but a lot of games aren't, and they have these narratives, but you feel agency within the narrative. Um, and I think like that's
Mm.
the like the amazing balance if you can pull that off, and it's very hard to do. Um, and so I tried to do that in the DARPA piece, like very imperfectly by sort of like doing that outline. So it's like so there always was structure, but
Mm-hmm.
you were not required to follow the structure,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So
Makes perfect sense.
there was like suggestion. There's like a like probably do this, but if you don't want to, like, have fun.
Yeah, it's amazing that we're like, now 20 years into this digital world that we're building, and it still feels like we're scratching the surface on that, right? Like I think
Oh yeah,
that ideal that you're talking about of feeling agency within a piece like that, it still feels like it's like really early days on that. Like I feel like your DARPA piece is a good example. It's like you can kind of you know make so much progress in that, and still feel like we have so much further to go. So
yeah.
it'll
Well,
be
I think
interesting to see what people create in that realm in the next few years, because I think it's a ripe subject, right? Like I think you're able to articulate it really well, something like Andy is kind of playing around with too. I think that's I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Yeah, I think the thing, just to put a point on it, is like the problem is that the people who have something to say and the people who care about sort of designing the way to say it are very often not the same people.
Right. Right.
And like that's I think that's the tricky thing, where it's like there are lots of people who, and this is like absolutely not my area of expertise, but like there are lots of like the sort of like tools for thought and interactive essay, and like people are really excited about the tools themselves, but at the end of the day they're tools for something.
Right.
And it's like that's where there's the disconnect. And then there's the people who have like lots to say, but then like they don't know how to code, or like they need to get a grant, and so like they don't have the bandwidth to go and try out stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I think like I think what we're saying with notes is a good first example, right? Like it's just like an explosion of like note taking theory. It's like, maybe it's just been my own kind of exposure to it. Like Rome and all these different like new tools. I could see the interactive essay and the kind of tools for thought really. I don't know. I think we could still make a lot of progress, I think.
Yeah, I think we definitely could. And I am hopeful. I just always like to raise the thorny incentive issues.
Yeah, no, I like it. Yeah, it's good. That's great. Cool. What about, I know you have this kind of you had an academic paper up first when you showed me.
Oh, yeah. So this is like me digging into, so the way that I go about sort of doing like technical research is
good.
Very often what I'll try to do is find at least like an anchor point. And that could be a person or it could be a paper. Because I find myself sort of like going into domains that I don't know a lot about. Where it's like I understand like physics and chemistry, but like like atomically precise manufacturing, like I knew basically nothing about it. Like a month and a half ago, like literally, like absolutely nothing. And so I'm still learning, but so what will happen is I'll like have a conversation like this with someone, and they'll like point me towards a resource. And so then I will go back afterwards and be like, okay, like this paper seems pretty cool. I was talking to Adam Marblestone about it, and he pointed it out. It's related to APM. So let me dig into this. And so there's like people have talked about like how to read a paper, and so like there's like you read the abstract, you read the conclusions, but then what I'm really interested in when I want to find like the edge of the field is like once I sort of find an anchor paper like this. Another one might be utility fog with atomically precise manufacturing. So like if we want to go really into it, like you use your good old-fashioned Google and you like find the paper and find it on Google Scholar. And what you want to do is look at the papers that cite the paper that you're interested in. This is the cruxy thing. And so then I'll like skim through, and what I'm looking at is when they were published and whether they feel relevant. Like for example, like this one probably not relevant. Whereas like this one's interesting. This is from 2003, so it's like relatively recent. So then you just start like going through and I end up with like a whole like string of tabs, and then you sort of like go through and iterate on that process. So then I would go
Yeah.
in and look at this paper. I try to like figure out if it's interesting, and then the other thing to do is like pay attention to the people who have
Mm-hmm.
written the papers, and what
Mm.
you'll eventually, and this is going back to the Zettelkasten, the key thing as you're sort of like swimming through this morass of papers
Mm-hmm.
is that you so like what I can do, so this is you pay attention to, let's see, I think I already wrote a note. Yeah, so I already have this, and what you do is you then start writing down all the authors. And so you can see that I haven't actually turned all these authors into uh, pages.
Right.
But then once you do, then you can start to see like then on this person's page, and can start to see the other papers that you've also read that they've written, because it's really easy to like lose the thread, and then you can start to see like who's collaborating with who.
Yeah.
Because my mental model of like exploring a new area in research is that it's actually about the people. It's like the papers. So if you like can imagine a graph in your head, the way that
Yeah.
people usually think about the literature is that like papers are the nodes,
Right.
and like papers cite other papers, and those are the edges. I completely disagree with that. I think that what it is that people are the nodes and papers
Got
are
it.
edges. And so what you do is, because like when you're thinking about the frontier of a field, it's not going to be written down. Like at the like there's so much tacit knowledge about all of this, that like if you can learn everything about a field by just reading, then it's like not the field's not interesting. And so the goal here is like all I'm doing as I'm doing this, like the goal is to figure out who do I want to send an email to, and what questions can I ask them, that like what questions, how do I talk to them in a way that makes me not seem stupid. So
Makes
like
sense.
that's
Yeah. I love
yeah
that.
so it's like really like a people process.
I love that. I love that
Yeah.
idea. You know, I think that's really insightful. I wonder, kind of like it's interesting that you search through the papers, even though your kind of philosophy is that the people are the actually more interesting nodes. So it's interesting that you still find it more valuable to go that route in the search process rather than like, going to like doing something that is more people oriented, like a research gate or something like that. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, so the trick is like there is value in the papers, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Sure.
like and the papers kind of act as filters for the people, right? So it's
Mm.
like, is this person writing about something that seems interesting and related? Is one question. And then another question is like, who very like again, it's like all in the structure of collaboration, where like you'll see, like you have to like look at enough papers and see enough of like who has been involved in like multiple interesting papers, and then you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's the person I want to talk to. Because it's like you need to figure, like it's completely unclear from like looking at the authors, like who's the grad student, who's the advisor, like who's like just like vaguely, like who's like the doctor who vaguely created, like collaborated on like the medical thing, and like who's the person who like really cares.
Yeah.
um and so you it's like you need to like tease all of that out in order to try to figure out like who the right person to talk to is, right? And then because like then the
Yeah.
trick is like you go and you uh like actually go and look someone up, right? So I go and I'd be like then
And
it's like literally like, okay, where's
And then when you talk to them, is your goal to act? So it seems to me that your goal here, both in the searching through the papers and in the talking to the people, is you're trying to get to the edge of what we know, and what humans know,
Right.
and trying to do that as efficiently as possible, rather than to. It's not necessarily to like have the knowledge. You're not like necessarily trying to, become an expert in the field. You're more kind of, you are in search of the edges.
Yeah.
You're trying to build a map almost.
Yeah. Well, so for this, so I think that there's a bunch of reasons why you'd want to get to an edge. Like one reason you want to get to an edge is because you want to like do a new novel research project. Right. Like, so like as a grad student, this is what you would want. Like, this is basically like the first semester of grad school, like what you would want to do. For me though, I want to figure out where like I'm specifically looking for these things where I'm like confused about why they don't exist, right? So like atomically precise manufacturing, like I want to understand why it doesn't exist. And there, like, I'm sure there are very good reasons, but people don't write papers about why something doesn't exist. They write papers about how they like did a thing that should contribute to this thing existing. And clearly whatever they did in their paper has not solved all the issues, because otherwise it would exist. And so I'm trying to figure out who the people who could answer that question are, because nobody writes about that, or very few people write about that.
Interesting. So it's I want to be conscious of time. Do you have to run?
I do need to run pretty soon. But I'm happy to like wrap anything up.
No, I was just going to say, this has been awesome. I learned so much, and that makes total sense about kind of getting to the edge, and why you'd want to do it. I have a ton of questions and a ton of reading. The last question, and if you can answer it in a minute or two, and is I always try to ask people what their best idea is for making science better. And I know you've given me a lot here, but is there anything you'd like to add? And if you had the ear of the head of the NSF, what would you do?
Who am I talking to, and how much power do they have?
The head of the NSF, right?
Does the head of the NSF actually have any power?
I don't know. So, okay, who do you think has the most power to do it? Maybe.
Gosh, like, the problem is like, oh Lord, the problem is like, well, like, so like the reason I'm being very slimy about answering this is because like I think that there's like no one person,
you're right,
who can like I think that there are so many interlocking things that need to happen that it's like actually no one person. But I think like like if I were to like spread a broad message, I think it's actually about like going back to the thing about like pay it forward tithing. Like I think that actually the most actionable thing is not trying to like fix government funding. Like, it's like I could suggest something like abolish peer review, or like doing something radical, but I think that they're like the thing about it's like this really complex system, and I don't think that there's any like point intervention that I can suggest without really redoing the whole system. So putting that aside, I think that like the thing that can be done is for people to start thinking about like pay it forward funding or pay it forward tithing. So like if you are someone or your company has benefited from research in the past, that is like anybody who's making a lot of money off of semiconductors. Like if you're making money because semiconductors exist, this, it applies to you, and like you should think about like funding forward so that we can discover the thing that is the next semiconductor. And it's like, we have no idea what that is. But the only way that we're going to figure it out is by doing a lot of like weird research. So I think that it's just like sort of taking individual responsibility for science. Maybe.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. That's awesome.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's great. Ben, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is super fun.
Being in touch.
Yeah, I apologize that I have to run.
No problem.
Just like, yeah,
we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.